In 1942, a Memphis newspaper printed a chicken neck stew recipe next to a war ration ad. The page was thumbed soft by women who couldn't afford the breast meat. The clipping ended up in a wooden recipe box on a kerosene stove in Alabama by 1944, splattered with Potlikker. Number 4 on this list was the dish your grandmother cooked when the rent man came twice. Number 18 fed her 4 children on 3 cents a plate. Number 9 on this list was the supper she made the night her son shipped out for the war. These 25 dinners were so practical that the supermarket spent decades replacing every cut. What most people miss is this: these weren't lost recipes, they were cuts your king couldn't afford to buy back. Hit subscribe. Here are the 25 homemade 1940s soul food dinners that have completely disappeared. Number 25, salt pork and cabbage pot, a blue speckled enamel pot on a wood range in 1943 Birmingham, 3/4 full of water, 1 head of cabbage chopped rough, a piece of salt pork the size of a child's fist. The cook cut the rind into a cross so the fat would render slow. By the time the cabbage went limp, the pork had given up enough grease to coat every leaf. The kitchen smelled the vinegar from the porch jar she kept by the door. 4 ingredients: 1 fire, a wooden spoon worn smooth from 20 years of use. None of it was banned by law. The supermarket just stopped stocking the rind by 1972. She served it with a wedge of corn pone and a glass of cold buttermilk on the side. Your grandmother knew the dish by smell. Her grandmother had cooked it through the Depression. You have never tasted it. Your kitchen does not even keep the pot anymore. Number 24, hoe cakes with sorghum molasses, a black iron griddle on a kerosene stove in 1944 Tuskegee. Smoking hot, bacon grease pooled in the center. The batter was cornmeal, salt, hot water, nothing else. She dropped it by spoonful, 3 at a time, waited for the edges to lace, flipped each round. Each cake came off the size of a saucer. Crisp brown skirt, soft yellow heart. The sorghum sat in a tan pitcher on the table, slow and dark as tar. A child got 2 and was full. A working man got 6 and was satisfied. Your grandmother made these the way her mother had during the Depression. A sack of cornmeal lasted you a family 2 weeks. The supper cost 8 cents in 1944. By 1965, the kerosene stove was gone. The hoe cake went with it. You won't find it on any menu now. Number 23, chicken neck stew with rice. A Memphis butcher in 1942 sold chicken necks for $0.05 a pound. Sometimes gave them away on Saturday night. The case had to be empty by Monday. She bought 4 pounds, simmered them in salted water with 1 onion and 3 peppercorns for 2 hours. The meat slid off the bone, the broth ran cloudy, the rice cooked in the Potlikker, no extra water. The necks went on top to keep warm. She stripped the meat with 2 forks at the table while the children watched and learned. That was how every Memphis cook taught her daughter. The dish fed 7 for 30 cents. The Memphis paper printed it next to a war bond ad and a coupon for canned milk. In those years, nobody threw away the necks. By 1968, the supermarket sold whole chickens, cheap enough that nobody bothered. The butcher case stopped stocking them around 1974. Year after year, the cut got harder to find. You can't even ask for them today. Number 22, pig feet jelly with hot vinegar. A glass mason jar on the back porch shelf in 1945 Charleston, packed with split pig feet, water, salt, bay leaf, and 3 cloves of garlic. She simmered the feet for 6 hours. The meat fell off. The broth turned the color of weak tea. She strained it, pressed the meat into the jar, let the natural collagen do the work. By morning, the whole thing had set into a pale amber jelly. She sliced it cold for supper, served it with hot pepper vinegar in a thin saucer, a stack of saltine crackers on the side. A man came in from the field, ate half the jar, asked for more. The dish needed no icebox in winter. Your grandmother could feed a working man on what the white grocer threw away. That was the genius of her Depression kitchen. You wouldn't think a foot could become supper, but it could. Number 21, cornmeal mush with skim milk gravy. A cast iron skillet on a coal stove in 1943 Detroit. A cup of yellow cornmeal whisked into 3 cups of boiling salted water. The cook stirred it for 20 minutes. It pulled away from the sides of the pan in one piece, glossy and yellow as a winter sun. She poured it into a loaf tin, let it set firm overnight on the cold side of the porch. Morning came. She sliced it 1/2 inch thick, fried each piece in a teaspoon of bacon grease, topped it with skim milk gravy. The supper cost 6 cents and fed 3. The mill on Hastings Street ground the meal. The milkman delivered the skim free because nobody wanted it. Every black household in your block kept a coffee can of bacon grease on the stove, the kitchen heart of your neighborhood. By 1972, both were gone. Number 20, stewed turnip greens with Potlikker bread. A galvanized washtub of greens on the kitchen floor in 1946 Atlanta. 2 pecks pulled that morning from the back lot. She stripped the leaves from the stems with her thumbs, tore them into ribbons, dropped them into a cast iron pot with a smoked ham hock and a quart of water. The greens cooked down for 3 hours, dark as wet leather. The Potlikker ran the color of strong tea. The Potlikker was the prize. She tore corn pone into a tin bowl, ladled the green broth over it, called the children for supper. Each portion cost 4 cents. The doctor in 1956 told her the broth carried more iron than the steak he couldn't afford to recommend. Your grandmother already knew. She had been cooking it that way for decades. By 1989, the smoked ham hock was a specialty item, and the back lot where you grew the greens was a parking pad. Number 19, hominy and fatback grits, a low country Sunday breakfast that ruled kitchens from Charleston to Savannah. A 10-quart pot on a propane burner in 1948 Charleston. 3 cups of dried hominy soaked overnight in lye water made from wood ash. Rinsed twice in the morning. The fatback was cured pork belly with the rind on. The cook sliced it thick with a butcher knife she had sharpened every Saturday for 30 years. She rendered it slow until the cracklings floated golden. The grease ran clear. She lifted the cracklings out with a slotted spoon, set them on brown paper for a sandwich the next day, stirred the hominy into the rendered fat for 40 minutes. The kernels burst soft and golden. Salt and black pepper were the only seasoning. The pot fed 9 for 20 cents. A field hand ate it for breakfast, walked 4 miles to the field, worked through to supper without complaint. The fatback rind went into a paper sack on the back porch, got fried up the next day on a wedge of cornbread. The dish was the working answer to a Lent that lasted past Easter. The hominy came from a Geechee mill that ground corn the same way the Gullah women had for centuries. The recipe moved from mother to daughter like a Bible verse. This was the kind of cooking nobody had a name for yet. It sat on every Sunday table you walked past from Charleston to Savannah. By 1962, the lye treatment was banned in commercial kitchens. Home cooks switched to canned hominy. The texture wasn't the same. The dish quietly disappeared. The recipe survived only in the heads of women born before 1948. Number 18, smothered oxtails with onion. A heavy enamel Dutch oven on a coal range in 1947, Cleveland. 4 pounds of oxtails, dredged in flour, browned on every side. They wore a dark crust. The cook poured off most of the grease, added 2 yellow onions sliced thick, 3 cloves of garlic, a quart of beef broth from the bones the day before. She covered the pot, slid it to the back of the range, let it braise 4 hours while she did the wash. The oxtails came out fork tender. The gravy was the color of strong coffee. The onions had melted into the sauce. She served it over white rice with stewed collards and a wedge of cornbread fresh from the oven. The dish fed 6 for 35 cents in 1947. That was the whole bill. Your grandfather ate it on Sunday after church, the way his father had before him. It signaled your family had survived another week. Number 17, fried Bologna and biscuit sandwich. A round of red rind Bologna on the butcher counter in 1944 Pittsburgh, 20 cents a pound. The War Ration Board rewrote the rules every other Tuesday. She cut 4 thick slices, scored each one with an X to keep it from puffing, laid them in a hot iron skillet with a teaspoon of bacon grease. The edges curled into little cups that held the grease. The centers turned the color of a warm brick. The biscuits were buttermilk, baked that morning in the same skillet. She split them, laid the fried slice on the bottom half, pressed the top down so the grease soaked through. A coal miner ate 2 for breakfast and a third in his lunch pail wrapped in waxed paper. That was breakfast. The sandwich cost 5 cents in 1944. Your grandfather carried one like it into the coal seam every morning. It was the shift food of every miner from Pittsburgh to Beckley. The dish disappeared by 1980 when the Bologna lost its red rind. Number 16, liver and gravy over rice. A pound of beef liver on the butcher's paper in 1945 New Orleans. Deep purple, dressed in flour, she sliced it thin, dredged each piece, seared it in bacon drippings 2 minutes aside. The outside browned, the inside stayed pink. The liver came out, 3 sliced onions went in, sweated soft, caramel color. The kitchen smelled sweet enough to bring the children in from the yard. She made the gravy in the same pan with the fawn, a tablespoon of flour, and a cup of water from the rice pot. The whole supper went over a plate of long, grain Carolina rice. It cost 12 cents and fed 4. Your grandmother served it once a week the way her mother had during the Depression. Liver was a Wednesday staple in every working kitchen. By 1973, liver had become a punishment children whispered about on the school bus. The dish vanished. Number 15, ham hock and lima beans. A 2-pound bag of dried baby limas on the kitchen table in 1946 Mobile, soaked overnight with a teaspoon of baking soda. The cook drained them, rinsed them, dropped them into a Dutch oven with a smoked ham hock the butcher gave her free. She added a yellow onion stuck with 3 cloves, a bay leaf, enough water to cover by 2 inches. The pot simmered 4 hours while she ironed shirts. The hock came out. She stripped the meat, stirred it back in, salt last so the beans stayed tender. She served it over white rice with a wedge of corn pone and a slice of raw onion. The dish fed 5 for 9 cents. That was the whole bill. It ran the family from Wednesday to Friday, and any week the paycheck came up short. Your grandmother kept the recipe in her head the way her ancestors had since the cotton fields. Number 14, Sunday neck bones with rice and potlikker. The dish that anchored the family table from Mississippi to Memphis. A blue speckled roaster on a coal range in 1949 Greenwood. 4 pounds of pork neck bones rinsed and salted, laid in a single layer. The cook poured a quart of water over them, added 1 yellow onion sliced rough, 3 garlic cloves crushed under a knife, a bay leaf, a long shake of black pepper. She covered the pot with a heavy iron lid, slid it to the back burner. The heat ran low. For 3 hours, the neck bones rendered their fat. The bones gave up their marrow into a dark, glossy potlikker. The kitchen smelled like every Sunday she could remember from her own mother's kitchen in Yazoo City. The same smell rose at the same hour from every black household for 1,000 miles. The rice cooked in a separate pot with the broth and a teaspoon of lard. The bones came out. She laid them on a platter under a clean dish towel. The gravy was thickened with a slurry of flour and cold water. She served the rice in a bowl, ladled potlikker into the center, piled the meat from the bones on top, a side of stewed cabbage with bacon ends. The Sunday after the funeral, she made it for 35 people in the church basement. 9 pounds of neck bones the butcher sold her for $2 and a kind word about her late husband. The Potlikker that day fed mourners who had not eaten since Friday afternoon. By 1990, the supermarket had stopped stocking neck bones that big. The recipe survived only in the heads of women born before 1955. The dish was the working answer to a paycheck that ran out before payday. It wasn't the recipe that died, it was the cut. A cook could buy 4 pounds for a quarter once. You can't find them at all now. You can't even ask the butcher. That's how a tradition disappears without anyone noticing the day it left. Number 13, skillet cornbread with cracklings. A 12-inch cast iron skillet on a wood stove in 1942 Tuskegee. Heated until a drop of water danced across the surface. The cook rendered a half pound of pork fat into golden cracklings the day before. Set them in a tin on the back of the stove. The batter was 2 cups yellow cornmeal, 1 egg, a cup of buttermilk, a teaspoon of soda. The cracklings folded in last. She poured a tablespoon of bacon grease into the hot skillet, swirled it around the sides, dropped the batter in with a hiss that brought the children in from the yard. The cornbread baked 20 minutes, came out with a brown crust thick enough to crack with a spoon. It fed 6 for 7 cents, eaten standing at the stove with a glass of cold milk. That was supper. Your grandmother kept hers in a Maxwell House tin she had saved since the war. Every kitchen in your town kept cracklings on the back of the stove. By 1985, the cracklings came in a bag from the gas station and the cornbread came from a box. You wouldn't know to ask for the real thing. Number 12, sweet potato hush puppies. A bowl of grated sweet potato on the kitchen counter in 1944 Savannah, mixed with a cup of yellow cornmeal, a half cup of flour, an egg, a teaspoon of baking powder, enough buttermilk to bind it loose. The cook dropped the batter by a tablespoon into a skillet of hot lard. The hush puppies rolled themselves over as they fried. They came out the size of a walnut, golden brown on the outside, soft and orange in the middle, sweet without sugar. The potato did all the work. She served them with stewed catfish from the river and a wedge of lemon picked from the tree behind the house. The dish fed 5 for 11 cents. Your grandmother grew the sweet potatoes herself in a small lot behind the kitchen. The root cellar under your porch held them through winter. It was the backup pantry of every coastal Georgia household. By 1976, the deep fryer at the corner restaurant had taken over and you stopped pulling out the skillet at home. Number 11, fried apples with side meat. A bushel of mountain apples on the back porch in 1946 Knoxville. Picked late, sour enough to make a child wince. She sliced 4 of them thick with the skin on, laid them in a hot skillet with 2 strips of side meat already crisping. The bacon came out. The apples went in. The cook sprinkled a tablespoon of brown sugar and a pinch of cinnamon over the top. They cooked down 10 minutes. The edges browned. The centers turned soft and translucent. She served them with the side meat broken on top, a hot biscuit on the side fresh from the oven. The supper cost 6 cents and fed 4. Your grandmother picked the apples herself, the way her people had for years. Every Knoxville kitchen on your block kept a bushel on the porch in October. By 1971, the side meat was specialty grocery, and the mountain apple orchards had been replaced with subdivisions. Number 10, salmon croquettes with day-old bread. A 15-cent can of pink salmon on the kitchen table in 1947 Chicago, dumped into a mixing bowl with the liquid still in. The cook added a beaten egg, a cup of yellow cornmeal, a half cup of finely chopped onion, salt and black pepper, 4 slices of day-old bread, torn small by hand. She mixed it with a fork until it held together, shaped it into 8 patties the size of her palm, fried them in bacon grease 3 minutes aside. The outside crusted brown, the inside stayed moist. She served them with a side of grits and a saucer of hot pepper vinegar from the porch jar. The supper fed 5 for 20 cents. The bread was free because the corner store sold yesterday's loaves for a nickel a sack. Your grandmother knew which days to go, Tuesdays and Fridays. The grocery run you remember from your childhood. By 1984, the can of salmon had quadrupled in price, and the recipe quietly left the rotation. Number 9, hot water cornbread with molasses. A small bowl of yellow cornmeal on the table in 1944. Selma. Salt and a pinch of sugar stirred in. The cook poured boiling water over it slow, stirred with a wooden spoon until the meal swelled. The dough held a shape. She let it rest 5 minutes, scooped it by the heaping tablespoon, slid each round into a hot skillet of bacon grease. They fried 6 minutes aside, crisp as a cracker on the outside, soft inside. She stacked them on a plate, drizzled sorghum molasses across the top, served them with a glass of cold buttermilk. The supper cost 3 cents and fed 4. That was supper. The night her oldest son shipped out for the Pacific in 1944, she made 12 and gave him 6 wrapped in butcher paper for the train. Your great-grandmother had done the same when her son left for the Argonne. Same kitchen ritual, different war. By 1969, the bacon grease jar was gone and the hot water cornbread went with it. Number 8, field peas with smoked turkey wing. A pound bag of dried field peas on the porch in 1948, Macon. Soaked overnight, rinsed in the morning. The cook simmered them with 1 smoked turkey wing. The butcher sold it for 7 cents. A yellow onion, 2 garlic cloves, a long shake of black pepper. The wing renders slow over 3 hours. The peas took on a deep smoke flavor without a slice of pork. She served them over rice with cornbread and a slice of raw tomato from the back garden. The supper fed 5 for 11 cents. The smoked turkey wing was the black belt cook's answer to a Lent that lasted past Easter. Your grandmother smoked her own wings on a tin shed in the backyard. Every Macon household on your block kept a smoker. The hardwood of choice was hickory. By 1991, the wing came in a plastic vacuum pack and the dish lost its slow smoke flavor. Number 7, pickled pig feet with crackers. A glass jar on a back porch shelf in 1943 Greenwood, packed with cooked pig feet, white vinegar, water, peppercorns, bay leaf, 3 pickling spices wrapped in cheesecloth. She let them cure 2 weeks in a cold corner. The first one came out pink and tender, sliced cold, eaten with saltine crackers and a dab of yellow mustard. A field hand ate 3 with a glass of sweet tea on his way home from the gin. The supper cost 4 cents per serving. That was the whole price. The jar lasted 6 weeks unrefrigerated on the porch shelf in winter. Your grandmother kept 3 on her shelf at all times. The pickling spice came from a tin the corner store had stocked for years. By 1980, the supermarket had stopped stocking the feet altogether. Number 6, buttermilk biscuits and tomato gravy. 2 cups of soft winter wheat flour on a wooden table in 1946 Tupelo, a teaspoon of baking powder, a pinch of salt, a 1/4 cup of cold lard cut in with 2 knives. The cook poured in a cup of cold buttermilk, stirred just enough to bind, turned the dough out onto a floured board, patted it 1/2 inch thick, cut 6 biscuits with a tin can. They baked 12 minutes. The tomato gravy came together in a separate skillet, 2 tablespoons of bacon grease, a tablespoon of flour browned to peanut color, a pint jar of canned tomatoes from last summer's garden. She poured the gravy over the split biscuits and served the supper with a glass of cold milk. The dish fed 5 for 8 cents. That was the whole bill. Your grandmother canned tomatoes every August the way her mother had before her. It was the August ritual of every Tupelo kitchen on your street. By 1979, the canned tomato jar was a museum piece, and the recipe survived only on church supper tables. Number 5, boiled peanuts with cornbread. A burlap sack of green peanuts on the back porch in 1945 Augusta. Fresh dug from the back lot that morning. The cook dumped 2 pounds into a stock pot with a half cup of salt, enough water to cover by 4 inches. The pot simmered all afternoon on the wood stove. The peanuts boiled soft and salty in their shells. The water ran milky. She drained them in a colander, served them in a tin bowl, hot and steaming, alongside a wedge of skillet cornbread. A family ate them shell, and all by the handful, through a long Saturday evening on the porch, with the radio turned low and the stars coming up over the pines. The supper cost 5 cents. That was supper. The peanuts were a working farmer's snack that crossed into being supper when the meat was gone. Every black household in your neighborhood kept a sack on the porch. The shell and eat ritual ran for generations. By 1993, boiled peanuts had become a roadside curiosity for tourists. Number 4, stewed cabbage with bacon ends. A small head of green cabbage on the cutting board in 1944 Jackson, chopped rough into 1-inch pieces. The cook melted 3 slices of bacon ends in a Dutch oven, cooked them crisp, lifted them out onto a paper. She added the cabbage to the hot grease, stirred it 5 minutes, poured in a half cup of water, covered the pot, dropped the heat low, let it stew 20 minutes. The cabbage was tender, salt, pepper, and the bacon crumbled back in. She served it with a wedge of cornbread and a glass of cold, sweet tea brewed that morning in a glass jar set in the sun on the porch rail. The supper fed 4 for 6 cents. That was the whole price. Your grandmother bought the bacon ends in a brown paper sack from the butcher for a penny, every Saturday for the years you knew her. By 1985, the bacon ends had been replaced with thin sliced strips at 4 times the price, and the dish faded. Number 3, rice and gravy with side meat, a pot of long grain. Carolina rice on the back burner in 1947 Beaufort. Simmered with 1 teaspoon of lard and a pinch of salt for 18 minutes. Each grain stood separate. The gravy started in a black skillet, 2 tablespoons of side meat drippings, a tablespoon of flour browned slow to peanut color, a cup of water from the rice pot whisked in. The gravy thickened to a brown sauce the color of wet bark. The cook poured the gravy over a mound of rice, laid 2 slices of fried side meat on top. She served it with a side of stewed greens and a wedge of cornbread, fresh from the iron skillet. The supper fed 4 for 10 cents. That was supper. The dish was the workhorse of every low-country kitchen from 1940 to 1965. Your grandmother cooked it on Tuesdays. Her daughter cooked it on Tuesdays too. You don't cook it at all. By 1995, the side meat was specialty cured at $4 a pound, and most home cooks switched to bacon. Number 2, Redeye gravy with country ham and grits. A cured country ham steak on the cutting board in 1946 Nashville. Sliced a 1/4 inch thick. She laid it in a hot iron skillet with no extra fat. Let the ham sear 3 minutes aside. The edges curled. The surface turned a deep mahogany. The ham came out. A half cup of black coffee from the morning pot went into the hot pan with the drippings. The coffee hissed, lifted the foam from the bottom of the skillet. The cook stirred it down to a glossy red-brown gravy. It took its name from the eye of grease that floated on top. She served the ham over a mound of stone ground grits. Red-eye gravy poured over the whole plate. A biscuit on the side. The supper cost 12 cents and fed 3. That was breakfast. Your grandfather ate it before sunup like his father before him. It sat on every Tennessee farmhouse table you ever walked into. By 1988, the country ham was vacuum packed and the coffee was instant. The gravy lost its eye. Number 1, neckbone gumbo with rice. A 6-quart cast iron pot on a coal stove in 1949 New Orleans. A roux of flour and lard cooked dark as molasses for 40 minutes. The cook added 1 yellow onion, 1 green bell pepper, 3 stalks of celery diced fine. The Holy Trinity sweated soft in the dark roux. 3 pounds of pork neck bones went in next, browned, then 4 cups of water from the kettle, 2 bay leaves, a teaspoon of thyme, a long shake of black pepper. The pot simmered 3 hours. The neck bones were falling off. The gumbo was the color of a riverbank after a hard rain. She stirred in a pound of cut okra in the last 20 minutes. The whole pot went over white rice in deep bowls, eaten with a wedge of crusty bread torn by hand. The dish fed 8 for 30 cents. That was supper. The cook made it the way her people had since the boats. The Sunday meal of the Tremor Parish you can still smell in the back of your memory. By 1978, the okra came frozen. The neck bones were hard to find. The dish survived in the back of one Treme kitchen until the 1990s.
Baked rice pudding with raisins was a dessert that came together from what was already in the kitchen, making it a perfect example of soul food thrift and ingenuity. Leftover rice was never thrown away. Instead, it was mixed with milk, eggs, sugar, and warm spices like cinnamon or nutmeg, then baked slowly until it set into a creamy custard. Raisins added bursts of sweetness, plumping up as they absorbed the milk and spice. This pudding often marked the end of Sunday dinner, or was made on special occasions when the house filled with the scent of vanilla and baked sugar. Served warm or chilled, it carried the taste of comfort and resourcefulness, especially during times when store-bought desserts were too costly. Every cook had their own variation, some adding a touch of lemon zest or a sprinkle of nutmeg on top for extra flavor. It was a dish that could be enjoyed over several days, growing richer as the flavors melded in the refrigerator. While boxed pudding mixes replaced many homemade versions over the years, nothing matches the texture or taste of rice pudding baked slowly in the oven, with raisins scattered like little treasures throughout. Stewed chicken gizzards with onions gave families an economical yet flavorful dinner that reflected both thrift and tradition in the 1970s. Gizzards, often overlooked, were cleaned thoroughly and browned in a heavy pot with diced onions, garlic, and black pepper. Slowly simmered in a rich gravy of chicken stock and a splash of vinegar, the gizzards grew tender while the sauce thickened into a glossy coating. Served over white rice or with buttery cornbread, the dish delivered deep, savory satisfaction that belied its modest cost. The slow cooking filled the house with a comforting aroma that recalled Sunday dinners after church and lessons passed from grandmother to grandchild. For many households, this recipe turned inexpensive cuts into a meal full of warmth and pride, proving that every part of the bird could shine when handled with care. Stewed chicken gizzards with onions stood as a quiet reminder that resourcefulness and patience could transform humble ingredients into a feast worthy of celebration and family gratitude. Chicken neck gravy was the very definition of stretching scraps into a full meal. Poultry was expensive and few families could afford large cuts, so nothing from a chicken ever went to waste. Necks were simmered slowly to release every bit of flavor, then thickened into a gravy with flour and drippings. Poured over rice, mashed potatoes, or biscuits, it transformed the cheapest part of the bird into something filling and comforting. Families looked forward to it because it stretched one bird into several meals, ensuring nothing was thrown away. This kind of resourcefulness defined survival cooking, and for many Black families in the South, it was routine. Chicken neck gravy might not have been glamorous, but it represented pride in making the most out of very little. It also carried the feeling of home, the scent of gravy simmering on the stove, and the relief of knowing everyone at the table would leave fed. Hoe cakes were a simple, satisfying food that came together from just cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, fried crisp on a hot skillet, or even on a flat hoe blade over an open fire in earlier times. They carried a taste of history, rooted in resourcefulness and the ability to make something delicious from the bare essentials. The texture was hearty yet tender, with a slight crunch at the edges and a comforting warmth in the middle. Served plain or with a drizzle of syrup, they made for a meal that could be eaten at any time of the day. In many African American homes, hoe cakes were not just food, but a connection to family traditions passed quietly through generations. They were quick to make, filling enough to sustain a long day's work and easy to prepare over whatever heat source was available. Today, they have nearly disappeared from daily kitchens, replaced by store-bought breads and processed mixes, but they still live on in the memories of those who grew up eating them hot from the skillet. Every bite was a reminder that good food did not need to be fancy to be special. Cowpeas and rice pilaf offered a taste of Carolina heritage that African American families carried forward with pride during the 1970s. Dried cowpeas soaked overnight were simmered gently with smoked turkey wings or a ham hock until tender, releasing a broth rich with earthy flavor. Long-grain rice was added to the pot, soaking up the seasoned liquid and transforming the dish into a complete meal. Onions, celery, and a hint of thyme gave the pilaf a savory depth, while a dash of hot pepper added subtle heat. Served with cornbread or fried green tomatoes, it filled bellies and satisfied the craving for something both nourishing and steeped in tradition. This was a dinner that honored the resilience of generations who turned humble ingredients into lasting comfort. It carried the memory of fields and family gardens while fitting neatly into busy urban kitchens. Cowpeas and rice pilaf reminded everyone that simple foods, cooked with patience and love, could rival any fancy restaurant meal when shared around a welcoming table. Stewed okra and tomatoes were the kind of dish that took simple garden produce and turned it into something nourishing enough to feed a family. Okra, a vegetable with African origins, thrived in southern soil, while tomatoes grew easily in backyard gardens. Together, simmered slowly with onions, spices, and sometimes a scrap of salt pork, they created a stew that was tangy, savory, and thick. Families relied on it because it stretched small harvests into larger meals, often served over rice or with cornbread to make it filling. The dish was especially important when meat was too expensive to buy, as it added depth and nutrition without needing animal protein. Stewed okra and tomatoes became more than food. They were a way to survive with what the land provided. For many, the taste carried reminders of summer gardens and the hard work it took to keep families fed. It was frugal, delicious, and a perfect example of survival cooking. Potlikker soup was more than just a humble broth. It was the essence of the greens it came from. When collards, turnip greens, or mustard greens simmered slowly with a bit of seasoning and maybe a ham bone, the cooking liquid would take on a deep, savory flavor and a rich, earthy aroma. Nothing in the kitchen went to waste, and that potlikker was treasured for its nourishment, especially in leaner times. It was often sipped straight from a bowl or paired with cornbread, which was crumbled right into the broth to soak up every last drop. This soup carried vitamins, minerals, and memories of long afternoons spent around the table, talking as the pot bubbled on the stove. In African American kitchens, it was both medicine and comfort, believed to restore strength after illness or a hard day's work. The taste was unmistakable, salty, smoky, and green all at once, with each batch a little different depending on the greens and the cook. Today, store-bought greens rarely yield the same kind of rich cooking liquid, and many younger cooks have never tasted this kitchen staple. Yet for those who remember, potlikker was a liquid link to home. Country-style ribs with apple cider glaze turned weekend gatherings into sweet, smoky celebrations in African American neighborhoods across the 1970s. Meaty pork ribs were marinated in apple cider, brown sugar, and a splash of vinegar, then slow roasted or charcoal grilled until the meat was fall-apart tender. Midway through cooking, the ribs were brushed with a thick cider glaze that caramelized over the heat, creating a sticky surface that clung to every finger. The scent of roasting pork and sweet apples drifted across backyards, drawing neighbors and cousins long before dinner was served. Served with potato salad, baked beans, or simple white bread, the dish balanced tang and richness perfectly. It was both a nod to Southern barbecue traditions and a chance to add a fruity twist that felt fresh for the decade. Country-style ribs with apple cider glaze embodied the joy of family cookouts, where music played late into the evening and every plate carried the flavor of smoke, sweetness, and laughter shared outdoors. Fried corn pone was a dish that required almost nothing but cornmeal, water, and lard, yet it managed to fill stomachs during times of want. It was denser than cornbread and more rustic, formed into small patties and fried in cast-iron skillets until golden. Families leaned on it for breakfast, lunch, or supper because it was inexpensive, used ingredients they almost always had, and could be made quickly. Corn was abundant across the South, and every pantry had a sack of cornmeal that could be stretched into meals again and again. Eating fried corn pone often meant there was no wheat bread to be had, but no one went hungry. It was eaten with beans, dipped in potlikker, or just on its own with a smear of molasses or syrup if available. Fried corn pone reflected the determination to create something warm and satisfying even when the cupboards were close to bare. Mustard greens with ham hock was a pot of comfort that simmered slowly, filling the kitchen with a savory aroma that promised a satisfying meal. The slightly bitter greens were washed thoroughly, then cooked low and slow with a smoked ham hock, which released its flavor into the broth. As the meat softened, it was shredded into the greens, creating a perfect mix of smoky, salty, and earthy tastes. This dish was often ladled into bowls alongside cornbread, which soaked up the flavorful potlikker at the bottom. It was a year-round favorite, but especially welcome in cooler months when hearty, warming food was needed. The ham hock was not just a flavoring. It represented the tradition of making the most of every cut of meat, ensuring nothing went to waste. Supermarkets today sell pre-washed greens and pre-cooked meats, but they lack the depth of flavor that comes from a slow afternoon simmering on the stove. For many, mustard greens with ham hock were not just food. They were part of the rhythm of home life, where patience in the kitchen always paid off. Cornmeal-crusted okra cakes turned a beloved southern vegetable into a crispy entree that delighted both adults and children during the 1970s. Fresh okra pods were sliced thin and mixed with cornmeal, minced onions, and a touch of buttermilk to create a thick batter. Small patties were formed by hand and pan, fried in hot oil until each cake developed a crunchy golden crust with a tender green interior. The nutty flavor of the cornmeal complemented the mild tang of the okra, while a sprinkle of salt right out of the pan sealed in the warmth. Served alongside sliced tomatoes or a dollop of hot sauce, these cakes were both hearty and refreshingly light. They made clever use of garden harvests when okra plants produced more pods than anyone could stew. Families prized the recipe as a thrifty way to transform vegetables into a main dish that felt indulgent. Each bite offered a satisfying crunch and a reminder that the simplest garden gifts could create meals worth remembering decades later. Collard green potlikker soup was proof that nothing in the kitchen went to waste. After collard greens were boiled with ham hocks or smoked meat, the leftover broth was packed with nutrients and flavor. Families would save it, thicken it with beans, rice, or cornbread crumbs, and serve it as a soup. It turned what could have been discarded liquid into a meal that could stretch for days. Potlikker was praised for its richness and vitamins, especially during times when fresh vegetables were limited. Black families in the South cherished it as part of their food culture, a reminder that even scraps held value. The taste of potlikker soup was smoky, salty, and comforting, carrying both sustenance and heritage in every bowl. It reminded people that resourcefulness was a form of survival and strength. For many households, it was a dish that fed both body and spirit when times were most difficult. Braised turkey wings with pan gravy brought families together around a big Sunday table when the 1970s called for dinners that were both hearty and affordable. Large turkey wings were seasoned with garlic, black pepper, and a dusting of paprika before browning in a heavy skillet to build a deep flavor base. They were then slow roasted in a covered pan with onions, celery, and homemade stock until the meat grew so tender it slid from the bone. The drippings were whisked into a silky pan gravy that soaked perfectly into a mound of steamed white rice or buttered cornbread. The rich aroma filled the house and made even a simple weeknight feel like a celebration. Home cooks appreciated how the dish stretched a few inexpensive pieces of poultry into a feast that felt as grand as a holiday meal. In many African American kitchens, this recipe became a quiet statement of resourcefulness and comfort, a way to honor tradition while feeding everyone well when money was tight, but hearts were full of welcome. Sorghum syrup bread was a wartime and Depression-era answer to expensive refined sugar. Sorghum, a tall grass grown widely in the South, was boiled down into a thick, dark syrup that tasted earthy and sweet. Families would use it in place of sugar, mixing it into simple bread doughs to stretch rations and still enjoy something satisfying. Sorghum syrup bread was hearty, with a flavor that carried a touch of bitterness, but warmed the spirit. Children often slathered slices with butter or drippings, while adults enjoyed it with strong coffee. It was a farm food at its core, tied directly to the fields where sorghum stalks grew. Sorghum bread meant that no one had to give up sweetness completely even when sugar prices were too high or stores ran out. This loaf was practical, easy to make at home, and deeply tied to Southern soil. After times of scarcity passed, sorghum faded, but the memory of that dark bread stayed. Skillet candied yams were a feast for both the eyes and the taste buds, glistening in a thick glaze of butter, brown sugar, and spices. Sweet potatoes were peeled and sliced thick, then arranged in a cast-iron skillet where they simmered gently in the sweet, buttery syrup. Cinnamon and nutmeg added warmth, while the natural sugars from the potatoes deepened the caramelization. This was not a quick dish. The yams were left to cook slowly until every slice was tender and every surface was coated with the glossy glaze. The smell alone could draw family members into the kitchen, eager for a taste before the meal was served. On holiday tables, this side dish often sat beside savory meats, providing a sweet contrast that balanced the plate. In everyday meals, it was a treat that made even a humble dinner feel special. Supermarkets today offer canned versions, but they cannot replicate the rich, layered flavor of fresh yams caramelized in a skillet. For those who remember, the first bite of skillet candied yams was pure Southern comfort, the kind that lingered long after the plate was clean. Fried porgy with hot sauce carried the salt air of the Atlantic coast right into neighborhood kitchens and fish fries across the 1970s South and Northeast. Porgy, a small but flavorful ocean fish, was cleaned, scored, and dredged in a seasoned cornmeal mixture before sliding into hot peanut oil. The crackle of frying fish and the sharp scent of cayenne filled the air as golden fillets emerged crisp and steaming. A drizzle of homemade hot sauce or a squeeze of lemon brought just enough heat and brightness to balance the sweet, briny meat. Families served it with sliced white bread, coleslaw, or grits, letting the simple sides highlight the catch of the day. For many households, this was more than a meal. It was a reason for gathering, a chance to laugh and share stories while the fish came out of the pan in batches. Affordable and deeply satisfying, fried porgy celebrated coastal traditions and proved that fresh fish and a steady hand could create a dinner worthy of any weekend crowd.
These 25 dinners were not killed by time. They were killed by the moment Black families could finally afford the chicken breast and stop boiling the back, the neck bones, the cracklings, the hot water cornbread. One by one, the cuts disappeared from the case. Everyone was a quiet answer to a butcher who priced the good cuts out of your reach. Tell me in the comments which one your grandmother made on a Tuesday. In Memphis, in Mobile, in Selma, cook one this week. Sit at your table, not in front of your television. These were not just suppers. They were proof that your working kitchen could feed your family on the cuts the world threw away.